On today's episode of the Real Recovery Podcast, number 33, we sit down with Dave E. for an unforgettable conversation. From growing up in a military family to navigating the emotional challenges of addiction and recovery, Dave takes us through his powerful story. We'll hear about his first experiences with alcohol, the ups and downs of family dynamics, and the moment of clarity that changed his life forever. Join us for a raw, heartfelt journey of resilience and transformation.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Julie, your co-host, on this journey of healing and transformation. Together with my co-host, Peter, we dive into the heart of recovery, sharing stories that resonate with courage and inspiration.
That's right, Julie. Each episode is a new chapter in this vast narrative of recovery, and we're honored to bring them to you. But keep in mind, the perspectives you'll hear are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the views of the podcast or our partners.
Indeed, while these conversations can be a powerful part of your recovery toolkit, they are not substitute for professional medical advice. We encourage you to seek guidance from your healthcare provider for any treatment-related decisions.
And if you're facing an immediate crisis, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands, don't hesitate to call the Recovery Crisis Line at 503-223-85. The number is also on our website. Help is available 24/7.
Now let's begin our episode
Of recovery, real recovery.
So I want to welcome you. This is Dave E., or just Dave, to the Real Recovery Podcast with
Peter. Hi, Peter. Hi, Julie. I'm Dave.
Hi.
I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad you're
We're
here.
happy to have you here. Thank you for making the trek to my house, our Studio H, as I call it.
His humble abode.
It's a
Studio
great,
H.
it's a great space. I feel extremely relaxed and comfortable here.
Very good.
That's what
the
we
point.
try. We just try to have a conversation, and I probably get more out of what you say. It's been like really amazing, the stuff. It's been like therapy, but I always get a lot when you share anyway.
Good.
Yeah, and you know him. Well, we both know each other, but I don't know you as long as Julie has known you from the extended family lunch bunch that we go to.
My home group. It's been my home group since 2003.
Oh, right.
It's been my home group since 1997.
I cannot even come close.
I was the first girl. I'm sticking to it, man. I really was.
Those comfy couches up in the piano room, CC.
I'll tell you a trick. He's passed away now, but Donald.
Dee, I know Donald.
Yeah. He didn't always shower. This is before he found recovery. So I would get there 15 minutes early so I could get the single chair and not have to sit by him. Yeah, in that room. And I was really grateful that he came back when he got sick and went to online with us. And I even made sure he got a cake in his last coin.
He came to one of our camping trips out of the Clackamas River, somewhere around 2005 maybe, and he had his own tent, and he decided that he was going to wear bells on his pant cuffs, and we had to politely tell him to knock it off, because anytime he had to get up and go somewhere, all we heard were these bells.
I guess we'll dedicate this show to D, right? There you go. I'm glad
he had that southern drawl in his literature.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I was glad he died sober. Amen.
Me too.
So, tell us about you.
I'll be 59 next month.
I didn't know we were the same age. I turned 59 yesterday.
Nice. Very close to the same age. Was born in Ipswich, England. My dad was in the military. He was stationed at an Air Force base there, and he met my mother at a pub while they were playing darts in 1963. And we're both alcoholics, and never recovering alcoholics, but we pretty much knew they were heavy drinkers. They would always go out and stuff, and in 1964, my older brother was born, and they got married, because that's what you had to do back in the day, is if you got pregnant, you had to get married. And then I came a year later, but I was also born a twin. My twin brother died at 3 months in England. And then after my dad was transferred back to the States, we wound up in Amarillo, Texas, where my younger brother was born. And I think it was somewhere around there he was going to get sent to Korea. He'd already put in enough time, so he decided it was his easy exit to get out of the military. So he took his whole darn family to Rome, New York, which is my hometown. And He moved around a lot in the military, and he did a lot of geographics. I don't know if that had anything to do with his own drinking, but we always moved around a lot. And so like we would go to a school and I would start to get comfortable with friends, and then we would pick up and we'd move. And I'd have to start that whole process over every couple of years where I was like the new
I
person
understand.
and, had to reestablish my roots. And it was really hard on me. I don't know how my other brothers handled that, but between that and my parents argued a lot. They were babies when they had us. My mom was 19 and my dad was 23.
Oh.
Those are kids having kids.
Yes.
They didn't have nobody. No parents come with owner's manuals, but
Right.
when you're that young, you have to do what your parents did, and so they raised us the best way they knew how. And there was a lot of trauma because I was a son of a bitch. I was a mischievous
Really?
I was a pain in the ass, and I would always be getting in trouble. And my dad's way of disciplining me was bearing my ass and hitting me with a leather belt. He's going to teach me a lesson. And my mom didn't know how to discipline. My mom didn't have to do anything. I found out later in life my mom suffered from a lot of anxiety, social anxiety, and she just was ill-equipped to handle 3 rambunctious boys. So that's probably why she drank. And my dad just came from a bunch of Catholics that drank a lot. And so there was a lot of arguing, a lot of misdirected anger. And we lived out in the country at one point. We lived on Pond Hill Road in Taberg, New York. And my Nana from England, my mom sponsored my Nana to come to the United States. And so she came over. She was divorced, which was very unusual for a woman of her age to be divorced, but she was ready to party, in the United States. And it was like, she was just like, she spoiled the hell out of us. So I loved my Nana. But her and my mom, they looked very similar in age, even though they were mother and daughter. People would mistake them for sisters, and they would go out dancing and do this and that and everything else, and they would get ready, and they would always leave their drinks and their cigarettes laying out on the coffee table when they would go into the bathroom to take the curlers out and get themselves all dolled out to go two-stepping. And my brothers and I would always joke around, you try it. And so we would sample the drinks at the table. And I remember that first time that I ever had a drink on Pond Hill Road. I came overwhelmed with the warmth. And I was just like, wow, so that was my first experience with alcohol and with a cigarette. There was a lit cigarette left, and I took a puff of that, and I hated it, absolutely hated it. It made me choke. Then my dad was like, we've got to stop moving around, we've got to settle down. And he decided that we were going to move to Rome, New York, which we're all over the place, all over New York State. But he graduated from RFA, the Rome Free Academy, in 1961. His dad graduated from Rome Free Academy in 1930,
wow.
And he wanted his sons to graduate from the same high school that he and his dad did. So it was like, me and my brothers would be the third generation to graduate from that school. It was dead set on, so there was like this, it's all about your image, it's all about the look, it's all about the image and this kind of thing. So he rented a house in this little housing development where, before that, we lived out in the sticks. I didn't have a lot of friends to play with. And so I had to do that whole thing where I had to get used to new people. And I blossomed early. So here I'm in 6th grade. None of my classmates are changing. And I'm changing. So I would go into elementary school for the first time in this 1976. And I was petrified because I would be sitting in class and I would get an erection. And I didn't know what to do about it. So I'd untuck my shirt. And I would get called up to the top of the class, and I was just petrified. Yeah. And I would look around, and people would be looking and laughing, and I thought they were laughing at me. So I got this complex about what was wrong with me. And that was the same time I started to realize that I was attracted to boys instead of girls. So there was another thing in the mix just to make me feel extra more apart from everybody else.
Right.
And at that point, we had moved into in the rental house. But then he had switched jobs again, and he had gone through some financial troubles. My mom decided she was going to get a job. She got a job at the base commissary at a flower shop. And so we became latchkey kids. There was nobody telling us what to do. You came home when you want. And I loved cooking. I loved to cook because my mother was British. And not only did she hate to cook, British people don't cook very well. That's a real stereotype. It's all like boiled potatoes, boiled meat, and it's bland. My mother used to make tuna noodle casserole, and half of it was peas. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
My mom and dad used to say that I didn't like mashed potatoes. If you'd had my mother's mashed potatoes, you wouldn't like mashed potatoes either. But what I was able to do as a little kid is I could take the mashed potatoes, put them in my cheeks, finish dessert, and then go into the bathroom afterwards and spit out the mashed potatoes. I have no idea how I did that.
I did the napkin and put the beet in the napkin. I didn't like beets. And so I'd have to get to what I wanted to get to. I'd have to eat 3 big ass beets in the napkin.
My brother did what you did. He filled his cheeks like he looked like a chipmunk, and
Yeah.
he would go into the, I gotta go to the bathroom. And finally, my folks got wise to what he was doing, and they put a stop to that. But it was, sometimes
The
it
things
was
we come up
miserable.
with.
To come up with. So, because I was interested in cooking and because I was a latchkey kid and my mom had to work, it fell on me, and I was completely fine with it. And that's where I became the person that was the caregiver in me, the fix everybody else's problems, and started with fixing dinner. But I would get home from school. My mom wasn't home yet. My dad wasn't home yet. Sometimes my brothers were, they weren't. But I would go into the refrigerator, and my mom used to get this big jug of Carlo Rossi wine, and I would pour out a glass, and I would tip the jug back over, and then I would top it off with water to the point where it was before I took the bottle out, so she wouldn't know when it was missing. And so that's 13 or 14 years old, where I was.
Have a little wine with your cooking dinner.
And then there was one time where my mother had bought a carton of cigarettes, and I was homesick, and I would usually use my lunch money to go to the corner store at school to buy cigarettes. I didn't have my lunch money because I called in sick, and she had just bought a whole carton of cigarettes. So I was like, if I just open up the cardboard and take the first pack and undo the cellophane and pull one cigarette out, shove them all back, fold the cellophane back, and then I'll put them back in the drawer. She'll never know that one cigarette was missing. Right. And I would used to go up in the attic to smoke a cigarette because smoke rises and they wouldn't smell it. I was so stupid. I didn't realize that if you were a smoker, you couldn't tell if somebody else was smoking in the house.
Right.
I could have literally stood in the living room.
Yeah,
but I
wouldn't
was
know.
so paranoid that they would catch me. I would either smoke in the shower in the morning or I would smoke up in the attic. I was also a pyro too. I got in trouble for catching things on fire all the time. So I stole that.
I love the cleverness, though. The cigarette thing, like, yeah.
But then I'm an addict. I couldn't have just one.
Right.
So I wanted to have another one. So then I opened up the drawer and I went to pull the thing out, and I got the second one out. And by the time I've done this process a couple of times, I couldn't, in good conscience, fold it to make it look like I hadn't snuck into that. I just hid the whole thing. She came home from work, and she's like, I thought I bought a carton of cigarettes. And she's like freaking out. She's like me when I lose something. I know I bought a carton of cigarettes. It didn't even dawn on her that was one of her kids stole it. So she thought she'd lost her mind. And meanwhile, I had a carton of cigarettes out in the woods in a plastic bag. I'm like, I got a whole carton of cigarettes.
And I thought you were going to say one pack and thought she was the whole carton. Jesus. That's funny.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, so that was basically how my addiction started, and some of my other character defects, lying, stealing,
I like the word
opportunities.
sounds so much more professional. Some of my opportunities.
But my mom, I've loved my mom, and she and I always got along. We had a special bond. Part of that bond was the fact that I can't remember how old I was when my parents told me that I had a twin brother that passed away. And that changed my relationship with my mother, because I realized every time she saw me, she thought about the son she'd lost, and so I had a lot more compassion for her, but at the same time, it just, I didn't want to remind her of it. So I was like, every time she sees me, she's gonna think of him. So
She was more grateful.
I know, but I just was like, I gotta get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be in that house between the bickering and the arguing. And my older brother used to bully me senseless. And my younger brother and I got along okay, but I never felt comfortable in the house, and it was a combination of so many different things. A combination of the fact that I was gay, and I grew up in a conservative Republican household. Thank God it wasn't a religiously public. Mom belonged to the Church of England, and my dad belonged to the Catholic Church. And when they went to get married, the pastor at the Air Force Base said, "I'll marry you, but you have to promise to raise your kids Catholic." And my dad looked at him and said, "Nobody's going to tell my wife how to raise her kids."
Yeah.
And so he excommunicated himself from the Catholic Church. So they basically raised us with absolutely no. So here I am in Rome, New York, where there's lots of Catholics and a lot of religious people. A lot of people believed in Jesus. And so that was another thing that I just completely felt I didn't fit in. Yeah. I was gay. I was an atheist. I had a twin brother that I lost, and I didn't think anyone could understand how I felt like that. And I didn't want my mother to be reminded of the son she lost by seeing me all the time. And so it was like, I could not wait to get out of high school. And I was always looking for something to escape. And my mom worked at that flower shop, and she started to do some stuff on her own. So she would make these beautiful silk flower arrangements on driftwood, and she would take them to these craft fairs. And in the downtown Rome, they used this place called the Living Bridge, where they would have craft fairs. And so she would take all of her stuff and she would set it up there, and I would go along with her. And this is when I discovered people would cruise for people in public bathrooms. I had to go to the bathroom at a JCPenney's. I walked into the JCPenney's, and there's a hole between the two stalls. And there's a little thing on the wall that says tap 3 times for a good time. Tap your foot 3 times. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that was my introduction to the gay community.
Wow.
Did you tap your foot?
I did.
Ah.
And then one time when I was 16 years old, there was a number on the wall, and it says, for a good time, call Kent and Joe. So I'm going to call Kent and Joe. And so I called them from a payphone, and they're like, why don't you come over this Friday? And they're like, they're like, how old are you? And I said, I'm 18. The drinking age was 18 at that time. I knew that if I told them I was 16, they would have said, they would have hung up the phone.
Yeah.
So between then and that Friday night, my older brother was hanging out with his best friend, and his best friend had left his wallet on the coffee table. And I stole his ID so I could go on the way to their house and show up with a 6-pack of beer. So
You are quite clever.
I am.
Oh my God.
So I showed up at Kent and Joe's house. There were 2 guys, 23 and 27, in the military. We're a couple, and they lived on Dominic Street. And I showed up with a 6-pack of beer, so they didn't even question it. And what was that line? That line in Steel Magnolias that Julia Roberts says, we did things that frighten fish. So they introduced me to, and that's where I lost my virginity, and and they also introduced me to marijuana, and we got drunk. But I walked away from that experience, and I was like, I've got to be able to tell somebody, and I couldn't tell anybody.
Right.
I went to my best friend's house, so I basically lied and said that I had fucked this girl, Linda. And he's, oh, really? You're not a virgin anymore? I'm like, no, I'm not. Yeah, she was amazing.
So I got to know. I asked this to a lot of guys in our group. Have you ever been with a girl?
Yes.
Okay. Just since that's how you lost your virginity.
I was with guys before it was girls.
Okay.
And I was one of those lucky ones that had to have a threesome for his first experience.
Well, that's we just jump right on in.
So
Little bit of this.
Yeah.
So I was one of those kids, one of those adolescents that just wanted to grow up really fast, because I knew that once I grew up and I got to that magical age of 18 and graduate from high school, I could get out of the house and I could be my own person.
And do it,
Because I had a lot of shame and guilt, and I wanted to be me. But along the way, I used marijuana and alcohol to ease the pain.
Right.
And when I was in high school, I was I don't think I was an alcoholic yet. It was just that use laid the groundwork. I was on the honor roll. I was on the honor society, but I was the one hanging out with the delinquents on the corner, smoking cigarettes and looking for the keg for the weekend. But I was also on the swim team for a very short time. But I quit the swim team when they told me I wasn't good enough. I didn't look at it. Basically, I was 3rd place at the first meet. And on the bus back to our school, the coach and a couple of players were like, oh, you should have done a lot better. And that's supposed to be encouraging. I was supposed to take that for encouraging, but I took it as they fucking hate me. Yeah. I completely misframed everything because I was awkward. Anytime anyone said anything to me, even if it was encouraging, I took it as I'm a piece of shit. Which compounded all of the
insecurities,
securities and stuff. But I was very good at cooking, and one of my home ec teacher was the one that encouraged me to go to college. So I applied at several different colleges, and I got accepted at Morrisville College, and that was the one I decided to go to. And I was in the food service administration program, and so I got to college, and I was like, finally, I'm out of the house.
Hallelujah.
But my drinking ramped up at college. What do people do in college? They drink a lot. And I was also, somebody invited me to be in there was a play that they were having. You Can't Take It With You. And so I signed up and I auditioned, and I got the part of Mr. DePina in this play. And I invited my parents to come see me in this play. And that character was amazing, but I was very good at acting. And I walked out onto that stage. I didn't even say a line yet, and the whole audience erupted into laughter. And it was the first time in my life that people were laughing at me, but it was because I was the one making them laugh.
Yeah.
And I felt so empowered. And I was just like, and that's where I realized I was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, because I could be in a crowd full of people and feel completely alone. But when people were paying attention to me, when I was doing fantastic things, I just loved the attention. So it was either one or the other. And in both of those scenarios, alcohol was involved. So that was my college experience. I graduated from college and I moved to Utica, New York, which was the big city. And the summer I moved back from high school, I moved in with my parents had actually finally bought a house when I was a senior in high school. So I stayed with them for that summer and I couldn't stand it. My mother was so happy to have me home because I was cooking. I was a chef, but I was like, I got to get a job. So I got a job in Rome, New York. But then I saw bigger fish to fry. I wanted to live in the big city. Utica was only 20 minutes away, and it's only 20,000 more people. That basically like the upstate New York version of St. Paul and Minneapolis. Where if you lived in one, you were part of the other anyway.
Right.
But it was far enough away that I could. So I moved to Utica, got a job at this place called Carmela's Cafe, and I was cooking. And then I went to the gay bar, and I was 20 years old. I hadn't even turned 21 yet. I was 20 years old. I walked in the door. They didn't even card me because they saw me. They're like, "Ooh, fresh meat." And it was fun. What's funny is that in Utica, New York, in 1986, there were 6 gay bars in a tiny little town of 70,000 people, and they were all hopping. They were all busy.
1986, huh?
Yeah.
That's the year I was like the most high. Like 1986 and 1987. So we were coming out we're the same age. So we were coming out at the same time.
So here I was. I had my whole life ahead of me. I was a bar flyer. When I wasn't working, I was at the bar. And then at one point, they asked me if I wanted a bar back one night. I said, sure. And my friend Kevin, who was one of the bartenders, he took me down to the basement to show me where all the bottles went because they had this like chute. And this was before recycling. So they just came in and smashed and you just throw them in a garbage can. And while we were down there, he's like, have you ever done Coke? I had done Coke in college, but I hadn't, but it was like,
Coke.
it was a trip to New York where somebody like just had it and it was like a one-time thing. And I tried it and I liked it, but it didn't really blow up my skirt. I was just, as long as I had either a Budweiser or a Manhattan, I was fine. I was happy.
Manhattans are so gross. Ew. My mom used to drink them and she'd give me the cherry and I'd have to dip it in the Coke to get the taste of the Manhattan. It was like gasoline, David.
You dipped it in cocaine or Coca-Cola?
No, Coca-Cola. Oh my God. No. I just remember the gasoline taste. Oh my God, those are horrible.
I loved them.
So did she.
At this time, were you out to your parents?
I said I inherited a little bit of my dad's behaviors of being nomad and being somebody who wasn't happy if I had a problem with an employer or a coworker, and I had a degree in food service administration. I could work anywhere.
Right.
So if I had a problem at a job, I'm like, fuck you, I'm out of here. So I was always leaving jobs. Carmela's didn't suit me, so then I got a job at a food court as a manager at one of the food court places. And so while I was at this food court place, one of the managers was gay, and he would take me to Rochester to the bathhouse and come in, but I was working there. That's how the bathhouse thing came into play. What happened with him is that he was taking from the till. And when he got caught, he blamed it on me.
Oh my God.
And he didn't have any proof, but I worked with a bunch of work at food court places. There was always high school kids that worked there. And I was completely open about myself being gay. So I'll often talk about my sexual escapades with these high school kids. And so he, in his infinite wisdom, said, one of your coworkers' mothers found out what you were talking about, and she wants to press charges for sexual harassment. That's why we're going to let you go. And I wanted to fight it because that wasn't true.
Right.
And I didn't know at that point, I didn't know he was the one taking the money, or the money was even an issue. So I was like, fuck, if I'm gonna fight this and have to get a lawyer, I'm gonna have to come out. So I went to my parents' house that weekend, and my Nana was there, and so she was the first person I told. And she's like, as long as you're happy, I'm happy. And so then when I told here I am getting ready to tell my dad, a conservative Republican hunter fisherman, there's trophy heads all over the walls, there's guns everywhere. I'm like, I'm going to tell him I'm gay and he's going to run upstairs and get the gun and blow my head off. But here I am facing my fears, and I laid out the reason why I was there, and I told them what was going on, and they're like, if you didn't do it, then you didn't do it. I say, but I have proof that I didn't do it. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, I didn't sexually harass anybody because I'm gay. And So my dad completely shocked the hell out of me. He says, "You're still my son and I love you." Then my mother just fell to pieces and was hysterical. And she said, "Was it something that we did?"
That's how my mom did too.
And I said, "Well, if it was something that you did, both your other sons would be gay too."
Good
So that
for
was
your dad.
that. I know. I had a
Like,
whole new
good
respect,
for your dad.
a whole new respect for him. But the thing of it is with him is that he did what he in the moment he knew that was the right thing to say, but then after it sunk in, he realized, oh shit, I got a gay son, and he had some guilt around that because he used to give blanket parties in the Air Force. I don't know if you know what a blanket party is. When other soldiers in a confined sleeping space find out that one of them is gay, they wait until 2:00 in the morning when they're asleep and they throw a sleeping bag over them and beat the crap out of them. He participated in activities like that, and so he felt bad. But then he also didn't want to. It was for him. It was a pride thing. So he didn't want. They were like hush. They didn't want any of the extended family knowing. I didn't tell my brothers until after my dad had passed away and my mother was on her deathbed. Some of my other relatives knew. But yeah.
Before I came out, it wasn't like it was a big secret.
Oh no, I have to correct myself on that one. The coming out towards the end of my parents' life wasn't in regard to my homosexuality. That was in regards to my HIV positive. I didn't come out to them as HIV positive. At this point in the story, though, I hadn't even found out I was HIV positive yet. So I guess that's a good segue into that. Yeah. So I'd come out to my parents. Coming out to my parents gave me this sense of relief. I can finally be who I want to be. So I was just like, if I have a boyfriend, I can bring him home. And so there were no secrets anymore. So I was just like, that made me even more of a whore. It really did. I don't know what it was about just the sense of
You were liberated.
I was liberated. Exactly. I was liberated. But like I said, I was in Utica, New York. I was not keeping a job for very long because I had a really good habit of telling people to fuck off and not being happy where I was. Because I was never happy, no matter where I was. I always wanted to be able to tell everybody what their problem was and tell everybody how to do things because I knew everything. And like I worked at this place called the Steak, Eggs, and Greens, and Arden was the owner, and she ran her husband's breakfast restaurant after her husband passed away. She had no restaurant experience whatsoever. She used to own a beauty shop on the second floor, but when her husband passed away, she took it over. So here she is trying to run this restaurant. And they had this menu item called, what the fuck was it called? It was basically like a Nesca type omelet where it was everything. But on the menu, it listed all the ingredients. And that day we didn't have any broccoli. And one of my customers ordered it. And I said, well, we don't have any broccoli today. And all of a sudden I hear Arden, she's in the kitchen. She's, get over here. I walked like with my tail between my legs into the kitchen. And she says, don't ever tell my customers we're out of anything. So what am I supposed to do? Tell them there's broccoli and there's no broccoli? How am I supposed to manifest broccoli? So I was like, screw you. I walked off. So I started running out of restaurants to work at, but I wasn't happy. So I decided to go back to college. And so I set my sights on a bachelor's degree in education so I could teach culinary arts. So that was my next big thing. So I moved to Oswego, New York, which is up on the St. Lawrence River, Lake Ontario. And while I was going to college, I became co-chair of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance. And because I was more out, I was more free, I was more political. Bill Clinton he hadn't been elected yet. It was 91, but I think he was campaigning at that point. And so
in the library.
It's funny you say the library at Oswego State was quite active.
So was Bill's.
Oh my goodness. Not only were we politically active, but we were also ACT UP was in the news and stuff like that. So I started hanging around all these people that were very mindful of the pandemic. Up until then, I was so scared of it, I just pretended it didn't even exist. I was like of that train of thought where it's only happening in the big cities. New York, San Francisco, as long as I stay in upstate New York, I'll be just fine. Yeah. And they're like, not so much. So 1992, so if you do the math, I lost my virginity in 1982 by two guys from San Francisco in the Air Force. I had never been tested for HIV, and here it is 10 years later. So I was sexually active for 10 years. First time getting tested. I had to wait 2 weeks for the results.
It's a long 2
weeks.
2 weeks.
I
remember
I know.
That
and
time.
So I go in there, and she says, I've got some bad news for you. And I was like, I knew it. And she didn't even have to tell me. And so I walked out of that appointment, and I walked up to the Lake Ontario, and I was just like, this is not going to kill me, Right. But I was 26 years old. I was in the middle of a new college degree. I had my whole life ahead of me, and here I thought, I'm not even going to fucking live to see 30.
Were you in the community? Were others around you dying? Me either.
Most of the people in upstate New York, because it was upstate New York is nothing like New York City. It's red. It's red. It's very conservative. And so a lot of these people, when they got sick, they would move back home and nobody knew anything because the parents didn't want to be embarrassed. So a lot of times when people got sick, they just disappeared. There wasn't a close gay community like there was in New York City and San Francisco. And
For me, Seattle had so many people getting sick. And
interesting, what ties into that is, remember I told you when I first came out in 1986, there were 6 gay bars in New York City, or in Utica, New York. By the time I had left Oswego, were 2. They'd all closed because everybody was either moving to the larger cities or they, So I don't know this for sure, but I honestly think that the reason that the gay community just fell apart in Utica, New York, was because of the pandemic. I think there were some people that maybe they found out they were positive, and instead of going home, they probably moved to a larger city knowing there's a lot more support. So there just wasn't the resources in a small city. Yeah. They didn't have the magnitude of the larger cities. And so there I was figuring out what to do. And I was so petrified of telling anyone. So I didn't tell anyone. And a lot of times I didn't tell my partner. And that some more guilt got weighed upon me. And so I graduated from college with very good grades. And that's another thing. I have this degree in education for post-secondary education. And I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be able to get I'm thinking there's a label on my head that says AIDS. I'm like, am I going to be able to get a job teaching kids how to cook, where I'm showing them how to use knives, where I could cut myself and there could be a lawsuit, or I could accidentally infect somebody. Yeah. And so I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I finished Oswego, and then I moved to Syracuse. And by then I had a decent, close-knit group of friends. And I didn't even want to go back I was waiting tables at the Spaghetti Warehouse. And then I got a job at an adult bookstore in Mattydale, New York. And it was the graveyard shift. And we could smoke pot right inside the store because the owner didn't care.
Wow.
We couldn't drink. Bummer. But that just fed into my sexual addiction. And I loved it. And I would go home, and my housemates, there was always partying and everything. But then there was one time where I was working the graveyard shift, and I got off work, and I wanted to go drinking, and I'm like, it's 8:00 in the morning. Where am I going to go? And somebody said, have you ever been to the Armory Pub? And I'm like, no. They're like, yeah, that place opens at 7:00 in the morning. So I went to the Armory Pub. It was an awful place. I had like fluorescent lights. It's 8:00 in the morning, but I'm like, give me a Manhattan. I'm drinking my Manhattan, and lunchtime comes. I think I maybe ordered some food, and then by then I'm like, oh my God, Mr. T's is going to open in a few minutes. So I went to Mr. T's, which was like the last time I was in Syracuse, it was a drag bar, but this was like a leather bar. So I would go to Mr. T's, and then that night I got to Mr. T's. I know I got there safely, but I'm on my way home from Mr. T's. I don't remember getting. I came to at the on-ramp or the off-ramp for the street where I lived on, and I was covered in vomit, and I don't know how I got there. And I was like,
Scary.
I could have killed somebody, And I said, well, I guess I'm just not going to drink and drive anymore. So that was my solution. Right. That wasn't even the bottom that I needed to wake me up. So I was in Syracuse. And so my friend Mike got me a job at this place called Vendomatic, which was a traveling gig where I bought a van, and I had gumballs and candies and toys, and I went around and filled gumball machines and fixed kiddie rides at grocery stores. I was the vending machine repairman, just like in the song.
Yeah. Right.
But I would travel all over New York. My territory was all over New York State, so I had to find out where all the gay bars were. That was my job. And so I would coordinate all of these overnight trips with all these places: Danbury, Connecticut, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and Rochester, New York. And I was just like, my whole life revolved around, where am I going to stay so I can fuck, and where am I going to stay where I can make sure that you're going to get booze anywhere. But my life was just revolved around that. But it was the one job first job where I worked Monday through Friday, and I was self-employed, so I was able to finally take a vacation. And so I decided to go to Atlanta to visit some friends of mine that I had gone to college with. And on the way, I was in the airport before the flight took off, and my boss called me. He says, it would behoove you to find another job. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the owner is selling our accounts out from underneath us because he wants to retire. So he wanted to liquidate the company, but he didn't want to lose any money, so he wasn't telling us, but something leaked out. So I was like, fuck, if I'm going to come back from this vacation, I'm not going to have a job. So while I was down in Atlanta, the guy that I was going to see, he was a chef at this restaurant. And I told him what was going on. He said, that's a bummer. And God did something. And I didn't believe in anything at that point. But while I was there, their pastry chef quit. And I had made him and his wife's groom's cake for their wedding while they were in college. And so the owner of the restaurant hired me without even meeting me, without even an interview. So I went back to New York, told my mom, I'm moving to Atlanta. And my mother's, what? And so that was just like, finally, I'm really getting away. And so I moved to Atlanta and got a job as this pastry chef. And it was up in the sticks. It was up in the North Georgia mountains. It was gorgeous country, but there's no gay bars. There's no sex clubs.
Right.
And so on my weekends, I would go into Atlanta, and I was at Flex, this one bathhouse, and that's where I met my ex, Richard. And we hit it off really well because we were both addicts. And he was the one that introduced me to meth. And I thought it was coke, but I didn't care because it was just something that would change the way I felt.
Right.
And I loved it. What's that?
For longer.
For longer. But he said, he says, you ever thought about moving to Portland, Oregon? And I said, doesn't it rain a lot there? And he's actually, it rains more in Georgia than it does in Atlanta. And I'm like, really? He says, yeah, but in Georgia it just rains all at once.
That's what Bill M says.
And so I told him, I said, I'll move to Atlanta with you, but I want to make sure I've got a decent resume. So let's stay here for a couple of years so I have the experience to move forward. Even in spite of all my drinking and drugging, I still had a good focus.
Common sense.
I had some common sense. And so in 1999, he and I piled everything up into a U-Haul, and he put his truck on a trailer and came to Oregon, and I fucking hated it. Absolutely hated it. Couldn't find a decent job as a pastry, and I didn't want to just work for any old restaurant, but I had to have a job. So I wound up getting a job out of Intel at their food service outfit, the people that cooked all the food for all the nerds.
Yeah.
And it was called Bon Appetit. It was the name of the contractor. And so I got that job, but it still wasn't enough money, and I would have to drive from Intel back into town. So then I also got a job at CC Slaughters. They had at the time, they had this place called the Western Grill. It's where the Rainbow Room is now, but that's where the restaurant was. And so I was waiting tables for this guy, Don, at CC Slaughters, and everything was going fine. But I wasn't happy. And so I called my friend Keith, the guy who had hired me at the restaurant in Georgia. I said, I don't know, it's not what I was expecting out here. He said, I'm opening up a restaurant in Marietta, Georgia. He says, why don't you come back and I'll make you my chef de cuisine, the head chef. We have a beautiful open kitchen. And so I told Richard, I said, I can't pass this up. Yeah. So we pack everything up and move back to Atlanta, and we moved back into the little tin roof cabin that we had rented from this woman, and I show up at work at his restaurant and stuff, and Richard was with me. He says, what's he doing here? I said, what are you talking about? He's my boyfriend. He says, I thought you said things weren't working out. I said, no, they weren't working out because I couldn't find a decent job. He thought it was because I was going to break it, and he didn't like him. So there was this awkwardness and stuff. And so here I am trying to do this job. He's a control freak, and he's trying to do this and trying to do that. And the restaurant's not even close to open. He's got me tiling floors. I've never tiled floor before in my life. So here I am on my hands and knees trying to rub grout into these things. And he's got these people come in, and he's talking to these people about this restaurant that he's opening. And he was all like pounding his chest about how proud he was about his restaurant. And he looks down at the floor, and he's like, you're not even done with the floor yet. You've still got to do interviews. And he was just like railing me. And I was like, I don't need this. There I was again. This is not working out the way I wanted to. So I basically told him to fuck off. And so I'm like, now what I'm going to do? So I got a job at this place called Tanner's Chicken. It was a catering company, these two gay guys. And that was working out really well. And in short order, Richard asked his grandmother for some money for a down payment on a house. I called my parents, and they said, we don't have any money. But here we are trying to buy a house. I got a new catering gig. I'm like, things are looking up again. And I think it was like a week before closing. I walk into the chicken place, and they're standing at the door with a chain. What are you talking? What's going on? He says, we've gone bankrupt.
Oh, for God's
So
sakes.
I went back home, and I told Richard, I don't know what we're going to do. He said, we'll figure something out. And that was in the January or February of 1999. And your memory's probably short on this, but there was an ice storm in Atlanta that year. And so here we are, I don't have a job, and all of a sudden this ice storm comes in, and we're like, rendered the cabin uninhabitable because all of the plumbing and electricity was put in after the house was built. It was all in the ceiling.
Oh,
And
no.
we went to stay with friends during the storm, and the pipes burst and shorted out all the electric. So we went back into town to stay with these friends to figure out what we were going to do. And we had the money from the house, and I didn't have a job. And Richard's like, let's just take a few days and go to New Orleans and just take it easy. We go to New Orleans, and he's like, let's just move here. I'm like, okay. We had enough money to get an apartment for 6 months because that's what the rental place is down there. If you don't have a job, you better have at least 6 months worth of rent or you're not going to be able to sign a lease. So that's what we did. And so all of a sudden, here I am bartending on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And that town is crazy. And I went to this sex party one night, and they were passing this tray around. And there was lines on it. They were all already cut and ready for me. I'm like, oh, yay, Coke. And I took a line of it, and I was like, wow, my God, that's amazing. I had an out-of-body experience that night because the stuff that was on that tray was not Coke. It was methamphetamine. And if anyone knows anything about methamphetamine, it does things to people that are unspeakable. And that was the beginning of the end for me. And I would go back to that sex party for every weekend for about a year. And there was a nurse that would go to the party that occasionally would help people administer meth in a more efficient way in the bathroom. And so there I was introduced to intravenous drug use and sex parties. And by then, Richard, he was my ex. He was an alcoholic too, but he actually had the wherewithal to go back to Atlanta to actually get a job as a courier so he could make money so he could keep the apartment because he couldn't hold a job in New Orleans. I was still able to hold a job because everybody at the bar was usually using too. So I was among good company. But there was this guy that would come into the restaurant every night, and he's like, I really like your attitude. He says, do you know anybody in this town that can pass a drug test? I said, no. He says, get some Golden Seal and come to this address. I was like, oh, okay. So I took Golden Seal, which is this, for those of you who don't know, it's this concoction that helps you pass the drug test.
And it tastes absolutely horrible.
I don't remember what it tastes like. I probably washed it down with a Manhattan. I got the job at Morton Steakhouse because of that guy that liked the way I bartended. He liked my personality. He liked my bartending ability. So I got a job as a waiter at Morton Steakhouse, and that was my ability. That was my exit out of New Orleans because I knew I couldn't sustain that lifestyle for very long, as much as I loved it. So Richard and I moved back to Portland in 2001 after a year of drinking ourselves stupid in New Orleans. And we both made a vow that we wouldn't do meth again. And here I was working at Morton Steakhouse in summer of 2001, and all of a sudden 9/11 hit. And if anyone knows anything about Morton Steakhouse, it's mostly business travelers. They grounded all the flights. So all of a sudden I'm working at this restaurant where I was making money hand over fist, almost $400 a night. And all of a sudden they're like, you can come in on Tuesday. Or we got a couple shifts for you on the weekend. For a solid month, which is forever when you live, even though I was making that kind of money, I was still living paycheck to paycheck because all of my money was going towards booze. I was like, what am I going to do? And Richard was on my ass to get another job. He said, no, just get a job at a gas station. And things just started collapsing. And I remember that November, I still stayed at the restaurant, but we were both doing meth behind each other's backs.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't handle the stress, and I had the money for the drugs. Apparently he had the money for his drugs too, but we were hiding it from each other and then finding it and sneaking it. It was like hiding the meth underneath the coconut shells. It was hysterical. But we had moved into this one apartment. I had left Morton Steakhouse because the meth use had gotten so bad. And I got a job at the Fox and Hounds downtown. And my coworker, who was also my drug dealer, got me the job at that restaurant. And he taught me how to sell meth at the restaurant. You would get it ready before you went to work, and you would put it in a matchbook, and then the people that would buy the drugs would come into the restaurant. They would order whatever food they wanted, and then when they paid the check, they left extra money for your drugs, and then you just leave them the matchbook with the check.
Wow, clever.
Nobody saw anything, and we didn't always work the same shifts, which was smart. And so one night, my drug dealer was living with me at this point, and Richard and I had broken up. He'd moved back to Atlanta, and one night, he's getting ready for work, and he's vacuuming his floor. I'm like, fuck. I used to do after he would leave, I would go into his bedroom with a magnifying glass and a spoon and tweezers and pick out all the shards he would drop off the coffee table because he was a mess. When he was he'd be shaking and drugs were falling all over the place. And so he left to go to work. What am I going to do? So I got the vacuum cleaner out.
Oh my.
And so I vacuumed his room, and then I took the vacuum cleaner into the living room, opened up the vacuum cleaner bag, and spilled it out into a Pyrex dish. And I got my magnifying glass and my tweezers, and I'm going through this vacuum cleaner dust to find enough meth shards so I could get high that night.
Ouch.
And so I'm looking at the spoon, and look at there's hair, there's this, there's that, and all that. And so whatever didn't melt when I put water in, I just picked it out with the thing. And here I am, I'm basically shooting up vacuum cleaner dust mixed with meth.
Wow.
I'm surprised you didn't get really sick.
Yeah, I'm surprised I didn't either.
Person who had cotton fever and got really sick.
Yeah, but by that time, I didn't trust anybody. I was seeing the people that weren't there. I was humming, I was chewing imaginary gum, and I wasn't working at that one restaurant anymore. I don't know how many jobs I'd gone through in this very short amount of time. But basically, I didn't even have the money to pay the rent. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I called my friend Todd in Arizona. I said, can I ride my bike down to Arizona? Here it is August, and I'm gonna ride my bike to Arizona. And there was the
Please tell me you find recovery soon, because you're killing me.
Is it taking too long?
No, you're just you are literally killing me with the spoon and the vacuum. And being an IV drug user, I'm like, oh my God, I'm being honest.
So anyway, Patrick, and I said, can I store some stuff in your basement? He said, what's going on? I said, I've got my tent. Richard moved back to Atlanta. That was one of his friends from high school. That's how I knew him. And he said, what? Most of my friends had absolutely no clue what was going on.
Wow.
My parents definitely didn't know what was going on.
During all this time, you had avoided being picked up, incarcerated,
Yeah.
jail. You hadn't had any of those kind of consequences.
Never.
Wow.
I was still on the honor roll.
It's amazing.
It is really
That's
when you
amazing.
just listening to that, like
honor
what?
roll. Oh, so right before I became homeless, I needed money because at this point I'm not even barely holding down a job. I did have one. I went back to Bon Appetit out in Intel, but trying to do that when you don't have a car and you're far away from the public transit, because we lived out in Linton at this point. We had an apartment. We're just down the street from Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club.
Oh,
It was a beautiful neighborhood, but my drug dealer was pissed at me because I told the landlord that I was moving out, and he says, "Why didn't you just let me take over the lease?" And there was so much drama, because when you're in that place where you're using all those drugs and all of your friendships are transactional and nobody trusts and everybody's paranoid, I was just like, I gotta get out of here. So I set my tent up about 500 feet away from the house, and I was sleeping in the tent even though my lease hadn't run out, because I didn't want to be in that house. And so I called the landlord and told him what was going on. And he's, oh my God. He says, I want everybody out of the house on this particular day. So I said, I got to get my stuff. I didn't have any place to put it. So I lugged everything from my apartment down to the freeway, down to the street where the Harborton Drive met Highway 30, and had a garage sale for 4 days straight, 24 hours. Until the sheriff's office came and said, you got to pack this shit up. You got to go. So I had all this wad of money back up at my house. And I'm just like, I'd been up all night. I was whacked out, and I passed out with the money in my hand. And I came to, my stuff's still there. I'm okay. Oh, where's my money?
Yeah.
So all the money that I made at my garage sale was gone.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, why does this shit keep happening to me? And so I got my bike fixed, and I told the guy, there was a guy in Lapine, Oregon, who wanted to open up a gay commune. And I said, is it okay if I just camp out there for a few days? I'll be on my way to Arizona. So I rode my bicycle to Lapine. It took 3 days, and I got there, and this old guy I don't know what he was on, but he was delusional. But he let me stay on his property. He even took me to this food pantry, and there was this one room off the food pantry that had the circle on the top. It said AA/NA. And he says, you can go in there anytime you want. I said, why would I do that? It went right over my head. Back to my tent. And then things didn't work out there either. Things weren't working out anywhere I went. And one of the cooks at the restaurant that I worked at out in Lapine let me stay with him in his house. And I was dysfunctional. I could not do anything. I can't even imagine what people thought of me at that point. And so I said, I got to go back to Portland. So I had enough money for a bus ticket, left my bike, left everything, came back to Portland, and I went to Multnomah County Health Department because something was going on with me health-wise, in addition to being all whacked out. And I show up, and my doctor, who actually wound up being a member of my church, he didn't recognize me. He's, oh my God. And then the case manager came in and he said, do you think any of the issues that you're having with homelessness and not being able to keep a job, you don't have any money, you're afraid to ask your parents for help, do you think any of this is related to your drugs? And it was like a light bulb went off. It was my moment of clarity. Wow. And I said, what am I going to do? And he says, you're homeless, so that's good. We can get you into a treatment program tomorrow. And I said, well, whatever I need to do. And it was the old Danmore, which...
You know where the Danmore is? On Morrison and 12th. The city nightclub was at the end of that street. My best drug usage.
My best drug using. So there it was. October 1st was my first sobriety date, and I got into treatment. The night before, I had my last drink. It was a pint of Rainier at the Nob Hill Grill.
Sounds better than the fucking Manhattan. Just being honest, okay?
I didn't have enough money for Manhattan. Yeah. And that was the last place I ever took a drop of alcohol on September 30th of 2002.
I'm so glad.
And so I went 3 months of treatment. And after, there was one point, I think we had a curfew. We couldn't go anywhere the first month. But then after the second month, we had a curfew at 10 o'clock. And I was so fucking horny.
In downtown Portland.
I'm gonna go to Club Portland, and so
Gasoline Alley.
I had just enough money to get to. So I went to Club Portland, and I was petrified. There were people using drugs all over the place. I started getting that tingly hair standing up in the back of my neck, and I did wind up to do a little something while I was there, not drugs, but I was like, I can't do this in this environment. I can't. It's too uncomfortable. It's too triggering. Right. So I ran out of there with my tail between my legs, but I didn't forget that. I was like, what's going to happen to me once I get better? Am I going to be able to have sex the way I like to have sex? And I know I talked to my counselor about it and everything. So then it was about a week before I was ready to be released, I saw an ad saying that there was a new bathhouse opening in Portland called Steam Portland. And I was like, well, I'm going to get a job there because I don't want to go back to the restaurant business. That's a bunch of drugs and alcohol. There's no alcohol in the bathhouse.
There's a lot of drugs.
I got a job at Steam Portland. And when I had the interview, you could see clear from the front steps of where the interview was being taken to the steam room because they hadn't even put the drywall up yet. That's how fresh it was. And I sat with Al, the owner, and David, the co-owner, and I was like, you know what? I really want to get a job here because I don't know what else I'm going to do. I said, but I have to be honest with you. I said, sex clubs are a big trigger for me because I'm just getting out of treatment. I said, I need somebody to give me a chance. I said, I know that if I get a job here and I have support, I can probably do a really good job and actually stay on the straight and narrow. And they're like, we're going to give you a chance. So I got the job there, and it was going smashingly for about 7 months. And then one night I was cleaning a room. I flipped the mattress up, and a drug dealer had checked out, and all of his stash was there. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. I froze. I took the bags of drugs, put them in my pocket. Everything else I took to the front counter. I said, you kick these guys out. They're drug users. Look at all this stash they left behind, all their paraphernalia. I was like, how dare they, right? And I was living in clean and sober housing. So I was living at the Rosewood. I got home from work that day, and I took the towel rod in the bathroom apart, slid the drugs inside the towel rod, and screwed it back in. That way, if they did an inspection on my room, they wouldn't find the drugs. And it sat there for 2 weeks. I didn't touch it. And there was a recovery field trip, probably organized by somebody at MCC, to go to the zoo one day. And we go to the zoo, and you take the top elevator. Right outside the elevators, there's 2 restrooms. I walk into the restroom, and I'm taking a piss. And all of a sudden, I see something. I'm like, what is? I climb on top of the sink, and I reach over, and it's a needle. So I take the needle, I stick that in my backpack, and then I get home, and I put the needle inside the towel rod. There it is, just waiting for me. Yeah. My sponsor and his wife were going to Hawaii in June of that, and they wanted me to cat sit. So here I am. All of the recipe is right there. I've got the drugs. I've got the paraphernalia. I live in clean and sober housing, but I've got a place to stay for a week that's not in clean and sober housing. So the wheels are all turning. Meanwhile, I'm still going to meetings. I'm still taking chips, and I relapse. And the relapse lasted about 2 months. And that's the drugs that I stole that were left for me lasted about 2 months. That I found. They were rightfully mine.
Keepers, losers, weepers.
Those were gone. And then my sponsor's back from Hawaii with his wife. And how's everything? We're still doing step work. Meanwhile, I've got that guilt. That guilt compounds on top of the shame. And I'm at work, and I'm cleaning this chair, the pillow. I lift up the pillow and there's a bag of drugs. It fell out of somebody's back pocket. I said, God just wants me to continue using it. I don't know what's going to happen. So I just like, whatever. So I used that. But something happened. I left some kind of evidence in the garbage can in the laundry room. And the next day I show up for work and the owner's there. He said, what's going on? And he's got the baggie in his hand. He says, I know that this put here by you. I said, what do you mean? He said, everybody that works here knows if we find paraphernalia or drugs, we take it to the front office and we put a special location for it. We don't just throw it in the trash. So somebody was hiding this. He says, and you're the only one that works here that has a history with drug use. So he basically called me on my shit. And I said, you're right. And I just burst into tears. And I was like, what am I going to do? He says, call your sponsor. Call whoever you need to call. He says, take the day off and you figure it out. He says, but you've got two choices. You can either get back on your program or you can find another job. So I called my sponsor and met with him and told him, I said, I'm going to lose my housing. He says, yep, but that's life on life's terms. You need to tell them what happened. You need to change your sobriety date. They need to know what your sobriety date is. So I had to walk in to the house mother at the Rosewood and tell him what happened. And he was just so compassionate. He was so wonderful. He says, everybody is only doing the best they can with what they have. He says, and one thing you have is honesty. He says, and I appreciate that. And that was a good God moment for me, because it made me realize that as long as I'm honest about what's going on in my life, I don't have to hide anything. And it's when I hide shit, that's when I can get away with it. And that was August 23rd.
Which is his birthday.
Is
coming up in
coming
2
up
days.
in 2 days. I'll be old enough to drink again.
I'm going to tell you, I have it marked on my calendar. And because your birthday comes right after my birthday, you're one of the ones I always remember. And then we went out to pizza last year. You shared at the meeting, and then we went for pizza. It was, but yours is one of the ones that I remember. There's some I never do, and yours is one I always do. But I have to tell you, I'm glad we're to the recovery part. Just because I am a meth IV recovering drug addict, your story has been emotional for me. I'm so glad we're to your recovery. Like, I am so glad. Yeah.
Well, what a journey. My gosh.
I'm just amazed you never got in fucking trouble or anything.
I know.
I'm a little jealous.
I never got a DUI.
I've never had a DUI or driven drunk.
Okay. I had a lot of potential DUIs in my history. And I had a lot of instances where I could have been arrested. Even before I was 16, I didn't mention this back in some friends of mine in junior high school. We used to go to this back lot of this. It wasn't really an auto place. Remember I told you I was a pyro, right?
I want to go back to recovery.
Oh, okay.
I want to go back to recovery.
I was an arsonist when I was 15. But I
never got caught.
Never got caught. I caught a trailer on fire.
I guess it's a good thing I got in trouble. So there you go.
So here we are at the rest of my life, which has been one day at a time for 7,665 days of continuous sobriety.
And I love your honesty. It motivates me because not everybody is honest. And if you can't be honest.
Yeah. For those listening to this podcast, most people that listen to this podcast are probably in recovery, but it's there for the taking. If anybody wanted to listen to it and they're not in recovery, just stopping drug use and just stopping alcohol does not fix the other problems that created that monster in the first place. I remember when I was in rehab and I would just be walking down the street and I would just burst into tears for nothing, I thought. And it was because I was feeling emotions for the first time. And I had stuffed my emotions for so long. There's that saying that whenever you had your first drink, that was your mental age and you stunt your growth. So when I got sober in 2003, I was basically 12 or 13 years old. I was adolescent. And so here I am getting sober, working the steps with my first sponsor and
learning how to live.
And I continued at that bathhouse for 10 years. I stayed at that bathhouse with all of the drugs and all of the tweakers. And it was because I surrendered. It was because every day I would wake up and say, I'm a drug addict. I cannot put that shit into my body. And
that there, I don't know if I could do.
I couldn't have
done. Even today, I have a hard time going out to clubs or parties or that wine bottle will just be like, hello, Peter, I'm right over here.
For me, getting my blood taken is tricky. Like Your story made me squirm a little. I'm
Yeah.
just telling you, yeah, I have a stomach ache. I've just been the opposite. I have set so many boundaries so that
That trip to the bathhouse when I was in rehab that made my skin crawl. And I said, how am I going to be once I get sober? And that was one of the motivating factors of me getting a job at a sex club, is because when we get sober, they say you need to change one thing, everything. I've always been a very sexual being. I got that from my Nana, the party animal. When she passed away, my mom said she had more men than she'd had Sunday dinners. And I wanted to tell my mom, I have her beat. I wanted to be able to be in, like when I was in rehab and stuff and counseling and stuff, and I heard about all these people that are recovering meth addicts that never have a healthy sex life anymore. And I was like, I don't want that to be me.
and I think that's why a lot of people relapse behind that. I've seen it being in the program.
Yeah.
I've seen it time and time again. They get clean and sober. They miss that part and they just want some sex and the relapse comes with it. I've seen
Right.
it a lot. Mhm.
So I was in one of those unique positions to be able to kind of become desensitized and kind of grow a new pair of sea legs in an environment where drugs are present, but still be able to be sex positive. And, you know, the way I look at sex is similar to people that are in, can't stop eating if you have issues with food. I didn't want to stop having sex, but I wanted to make sure that I tried to have healthier sex. And so that's one of the things I've continuously worked on in my sobriety, is my ability to be an ethical slut. There is for those of you who don't know, there is a book called The Ethical Slut. I'm not, for some reason, I'm just not cut out for monogamy. I never have been. All of my relationships, including my marriage, were open ones. And for me, it's just recreational. But one of the things that I had to do in recovery is I had to remember that all of that sex-driven drug use, I wasn't like that before the drugs. I had sex prior to that, so I knew that I could have sober sex. So I had to go back in and rewire my house.
Yeah.
And knock on wood, it's been pretty successful for the past 21 years. And
So you have,
I
because
do.
I know what you do, and it's not a chef.
It's not a chef.
And it's not the bathhouse.
It's not a bathhouse.
So in your story, when you only have 10 minutes to share, right? You talk about things you've gone through in recovery, and which I personally admire because you've stayed in recovery during them. You talk about a divorce. You talk about,
My parents passing away.
yep. And I was expanding your program and the new meeting that you started going to last year when you were sad.
Thank you for helping me. It's a good thing to have the host know you so well.
Guess what? And I actually listen. And
Yeah.
I think for me, it's not your drug story. That's for sure.
The sex isn't the problem. It's when I have relationships. My relationships. One of my character defects is I'm addicted to the idea of being in love, and that's one of the reasons why my marriage didn't work out. And then I got divorced, and I didn't use throughout those two experiences. But then even after my divorce, I told myself, I'm going to work my program around my relationships, and I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and I'm going to have healthy relationships. And I ran into this person that I knew at an AA meeting from 10 years prior. And so we had this little reunion. When I met him 10 years prior, it was at the bathhouse, and we hooked up, and it was amazing. And so when we did fellowship afterwards, I said, I would like to reconnect, but I don't want it to just be a wham bam, thank you, ma'am. I would like to actually try to get to know you. And so I became vulnerable, and I let someone into my life, and I
actually
bared my soul to this person. And apparently they bared their soul to me as well. And I thought I was in a healthy relationship. I really thought I was in a healthy relationship. And that relationship lasted about 2.5 years, maybe 3. I can't remember the exact timeline. When we reconnected at that AA meeting, didn't connect intimately. That was in the summer, so it was maybe July. We didn't connect intimately until February. That's what you call a gay courtship. When you date somebody for
3 years in gay life is 10 too.
yeah, that's a long time. But fast forward to last September, and I had to meet my sponsor because I told him the relationship had fallen apart. And my sponsor was just like, do you feel comfortable with all this pushing and pulling and emotional entanglements and manipulation? And
You were sad.
I was profoundly sad because I thought I was in this fantastic relationship, but it was not healthy for me. And so my sponsor suggested I go to get outside help. So I went to Codependency Anonymous.
That's what I couldn't remember.
And I haven't been there lately, but the stuff that I did learn for the few months that I was actively going was very useful to me.
It's very
And that-
useful to me.
And it's not to say that I won't go back, but that's how my recovery goes with certain things that are self-help. If like the whole take what you need and leave the rest. If I get enough nuggets from something and I think it's enough to move me forward, I'm used to the path of least resistance. I don't want to overdo it in too many different things
No,
because
but it's another layer of the onion,
yeah,
right? You learned what you needed
I
to.
learned what I needed to learn, and now I'm in another relationship, which is I'm viewing it as healthy. I'm completely honest with this person about all of my adventures, and it's going well.
I want you to tell our listeners something, okay? Personally, I like to share the message of recovery as much as we share the addiction,
the
because I want
drunkalog.
it to be as sexy and as romantic and whatnot. I want, and there's like truly some things that I wouldn't do just based on fear, okay? Just regular fear, not to do with anything that you have done this last year that I admire the fuck out of. Okay. And one of them is we have a mutual friend, and I don't want to get emotional,
Yeah.
but you will go see him, cut his hair, take him out to dinner. You're always there for him, which is why I know you're so fucking awesome. Okay. But you just planned, and I want people to know that you've been at your job for fucking ever.
I've been at my job for 11 years, and this is a good job. It's
Yeah.
a job that has retirement. It's a job that has a pension. It's a
And it
job
sets your legs in
that
fucking
has
shape.
I get sick leave, so like I was basically not feeling well the last 2 days. I didn't have to worry about I'm not paycheck to paycheck anymore. I own a house. I've got 2 cars they're not in the garage, but they're in the driveway. I have a hot
And a hot tub.
tub. And I was an essential worker during the pandemic, so I was working overtime 7 days a week, and I was able to afford a hot tub, which I justified because not because I wanted, yes, because I wanted one, because who doesn't want a hot tub? But my job is extremely physical, and I'm no spring chicken. I didn't get started at this job until I was 47, and I'm like, okay, I put the plug in the jug and I put the needle down, and I've got this really good job, but I need to take care of me.
And
I've
you
got to
look
take care of Dave
great.
until he's able to afford retirement. And the only way I can do that with a physical job is to take care of Dave. And yeah, I use my hot tub twice a day without any guilt of cash and prizes. Be damned.
I want to bring full circle back to Rome, New
Back
York.
to Rome. So yeah,
Please tell our listeners what you just
I'm
did.
going to tell them what I did last year first.
Okay.
Okay. I mentioned my twin brother, and I mentioned the fact that both my parents passed away. But one thing I did after my mom passed away, I was the one charged with calling relatives and people, and I called my mother's maid of honor who lives in Kentucky to let her know that her childhood friend had passed away, and I also had to call her cousins Susan and Jane and her great aunt Rosemary in England. And so when I called them, it fostered a new connection with my homeland, my motherland, so to speak. And it's always been on my bucket list to go back to England and see where my twin brother is buried. So last spring, I planned a trip to England. I got a passport. I'd never flown across the pond before, but I was like, I'm going to do this. And I went back to England, and I took some of my parents' ashes to my twin brother's gravesite. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever done in my life, because I knew it was something that my parents would be proud of. And it was something that I never would have been able to do if I was using drugs and alcohol. And it reminded me that I survived that portion of my life, and anything is possible.
Anything is possible.
Anything is possible. So then, and it was just amazing. And so then I got a notification last November that my 40th high school reunion was coming up. And I'm like, wow. And I was like, should I fly or should I drive? And all my friends at work are like, just fly. I said, but you know what? I said, I've got my friend Constance, who lives in Sterling, Illinois. I've got my friend Greg, who lives in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I've never met my mother's maid of honor, who lives in Sedalia, Kentucky. I've got friends along the way. I've got a friend that I met at my ex-boyfriend's funeral who lives in New York, who's in the program. So I took a month off from work, and I planned a cross-country road trip. And it was the most incredible journey, Because it wasn't just me in a car driving across the country. It was me meeting people that meant something to me. It was me going to meetings in strange places. It was me being able to speak at a speakers meeting in Manhattan, New York. Every other time I'd ever been in New York, I was either drunk or stoned. Yeah. And how amazing that was for me. And then I went to my high school reunion, like full circle back to my hometown where it all started.
Like I said, full circle. And I want to thank you. I got a gratitude list from you every fucking day of that trip. I lived through you to all the places you went. It was amazing. And coffee is definitely a story in your life. Every day. Coffee. That's why I brought you the coffee.
I had people that were like staring at me like, what's he doing? Like those rest areas. I had a backpacking stove and a little thing so I could make coffee no matter where I was.
I love it. In the morning when you send your gratitude list, it always includes coffee as well. And I don't know, that and popcorn, I can really relate.
I love my I didn't eat enough popcorn on my trip, though. Did not eat enough popcorn on my trip. So yeah, that basically brings us to the month before last. So here I am sitting here 2 days before I turn 21, God willing, because it is about God willing. It is about, I don't take any of this for granted. When I turned 19 years sober, I went to a meeting and somebody was reading this article from Las Vegas, a recovery newsletter or something, about how some people that had triple digits in sobriety were committing suicide. They were dying sober, but they were committing suicide. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. That absolutely does not make any sense to me. And I talked to my friend Greg about it, and he sent me this link to a YouTube video that was basically the deconstruction of Bill Wilson's emotional sobriety letter. And that was when my recovery really took a turn for the unknown. I always thought that recovery was just go to meetings, do the steps, stay sober. There's so much more.
Oh my God.
There's so much more. And
I went to IOP at 25 years sober, right? Like you think you'd have it all together. I don't on a good day. You know what I'm saying?
I literally woke up when I turned 19 years old and realized that all of these days of clean and sober, but I didn't have emotional sobriety. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm working on in my life right now is
for me, it was alcohol, but whatever it is you're using, you're using it to quell your feelings, to hide who you are. And it's at one point it starts to take over and it hides who you are. You know, it buries who you are. And so when I got sober, it was a fearful time because there was a lot of me that was coming back to the surface that had been buried by all those years of drinking and drugging. And you start to feel again, and you start to get those memories and that essence of who you are back. It's overwhelming. And there's nothing, there's no quick fix for that. You've got to work through it. And that's the beauty of the meetings, is that there's others in there that you can then share with, and they've been there.
And I learned from that. Like I learned from you. I know for me, I had some years where my career was too important. I was still going to meetings, but then I had 11 months where I was just emotionally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt. And I'm grateful because I went through a kickstart and I got to a place of continuous recovery, even through fear and through a lot of processing. So I don't think if you think you got it all together, you're wrong. I think you have to be willing to continue.
Well, it's a continue, because there's constantly more things that come up.
Yeah.
What a miracle you are. And I want our listeners to know that this motherfucker is fit, in shape, looks amazing.
The job shows on you.
Goes to meetings while you're working, listens.
I go to more meetings now than I did in early sobriety. There's that saying 90 meetings in 90 days when you're in early sobriety. My sobriety for me has to be in every fiber of my being in order for me to be comfortable.
We're of the same.
Because I mentioned emotional sobriety. Emotions are extremely powerful.
And they're hard.
But the thing of it is, those are the things I used to use over.
Yeah.
So I have to reframe my reaction to my emotions. And I can literally be so sad like I was last September, and absolutely no thought of a drug or a booze comes into the picture. That's, for me, that's where the miracle is, because that used to drive my life.
Right.
And
You
you're
know?
honest about it. I have walked through some things with you because of your honesty, and I'm very empathetic, which I wasn't when I was using. And I see you be honest about it. Like I said, you were really sad. I was sad for you because you were sad, but I saw you do the right things. I'm not brave like you to even be in a relationship. I'm not there yet. I'm hoping someday, like Peter has a great relationship, and I want to be like Peter. I want to be in shape like you. There's people that do things that I admire so much. And I believe you are one of the most honest people in our group. And I learned from that. I also, and I don't want to get emotional, but there's a lot of things you say in meetings that I take with me and I keep them. That's not the case for everyone. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, you're full of shit. And I know you're full of shit. But you'll say something and I'll keep it for the whole week. And it's really good. I just want you to know that. I think that's why I wanted to get to the recovery part so bad, because your recovery, you are a person that I admire. Does that make sense? I admire you like big time. And mostly it's because of your heart as well. Like the way you treat Al, who's one of my besties, one of your besties, who's probably getting towards the end of his life.
It is, and it's extremely painful.
It is.
But you know what? I do those things for him because I know that how would I want somebody
To
to
treat.
treat me when I'm at that point? Do I want to be left alone because
No.
people are too afraid to face death?
No.
I've already faced the two big deaths in my life, my parents, and I was able to walk through that. I wasn't there for my dad. It happened quickly, and I was still at the beginning of my career and couldn't take time off. But when I found out my mom was sick, I filed for FMLA. I had enough sick leave, or had enough, and I said I need to take a week off and go home and visit my mom. And I
Same.
visited her in the hospital. I gave her a pedicure. I've never given anyone a pedicure before.
Wow.
It looked like a 2-year-old gave it to her, but you know what? She loved it.
It was out of love, though.
She fucking loved it.
And you've given Al a haircut. And Al is sexually active in his brain still, no other. And
I'm
he's
awful
always,
though because I tease him.
yes, and he loves that. But that brings me back to, at least in our program, you never have to be alone. And I think I've seen you be a solid factor for your roommate. I won't put his name out there in case he doesn't want that. And I didn't know that he would ever recover. Okay. I remember all his early meetings and seeing how good he's doing now. Oh my God. And I will tell you, I believe you reap what you sow, and that for what you give now, you're going to get back. Does that make sense? And you too will have the program and not be alone.
Yeah.
And it's the beauty of this program that as you get sober and you gain recovery, you are able to do the service, which I think all of that to
And
me is service. It's giving back.
That's
Not
why.
because you want to be rewarded.
Yeah.
You don't care that I give you praise. You literally do it for Al all the time, and I'm like you. I just love him, and I'm hoping he does our podcast. It's like one of my wishes, so I can always have him with me. No, seriously. And he's rebounded once again. When I saw him at the hospital, I thought that might be the last time. And now he's walking and he's feeding himself again. And I'm hoping,
He's got 2 offers on his house, I think, today.
yes,
And then he's seeing a speech therapist because it's one of the biggest things that saddens me about my friend is that when he speaks, I can barely hear him.
but it's coming back because I can hear him on the phone. And I will tell you, in all his bullshit, right? The day I had to meet with HR, 45 in the morning. I hope your meeting goes well with HR today. And the fact that he took time to think of me and send me a message, like, holy shit. Yeah. I'm blessed. And I know this. My foundation is strong. Yeah. And he has a real recovery podcast, Bucket Hat. He got the first one.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having
and
me.
Being open.
Thanks
and,
for making me cry.
Yeah, I felt like I was on a roller coaster there for a while. It was just like one more turn and then one more hill and one more turn.
It's a dramatic story, and
A writer too. That's one of my hobbies. And one of my gifts is I like to write. And eventually I want to put, because I obviously can tell I can talk for hours. And there's so much more in between all what you heard. I would like to write my story down.
so I'm in IOP one night, right? and she talks about something. Oh, she asked this question, and this question got me going because I came to Peter the next day and I went to therapy the next day. This question got me going. And after she asked this question, she's like, take 10 minutes and write your story. And I sent her a message and said, can I leave for the night? And I was sincere. I was like, this story you don't even have a clue. And the therapist the next day said, I totally get it. And it is, we have powerful stories. Some yours doesn't include jail, but boy.
And that's one of the things that prevents me from, or not prevents me, because nothing, that's the thing, the mystery of a relapse. There's people that they have no intention, or at least not on the outside, that they're going to relapse, and all of a sudden they disappear from the meetings. You're like, what happened? And then they come back and they're like, it's the whole, I stopped going to meetings. There's got to be something more than just that. Something else is in that
I think your choice. I'm going to be honest, like you, I've been through the parents dying. I've been through bankruptcy, right? I've been through college. I've been through just as many things as you.
So do you think it is once you say, fuck it, that's it?
I think that you don't say fuck it. I think you double down and you don't leave. Even when I would say the longest I was away from the program, and I was still going to meetings, but not like I like to, that you have to get an attitude that recovery is my life, okay? And that no matter, for me, no matter how bad any fucking day is, it's worse if I'm using. And then I lose all the hard work, the respect. My respect means a lot to me, not money wise, house wise, my old car, but the hard fucking work I put in. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that I've been successful to be out of prison 30 years. I am so proud of that now, where I was ashamed. I don't want to lose my sobriety. I don't want to fucking count over. And with fentanyl, will I kill myself now?
Yeah.
So I'm scared. I'm fucking scared to do drugs, and I'm going to stay right in that space. IV drug usage makes me uncomfortable. I don't go around anybody using, and that's what works for me. Right. And I stay in the program.
But I think getting back to your question, there are times when, like you said, it just comes out of nowhere. You don't know. And it's almost, I see it almost as there's two people inside of me. There's this side of me, this
using
and I can, and that's why we talk about everybody has different tools. Everybody has different ways of keeping their recovery close. But again, we don't know. I think that's why we keep going to meetings, we keep learning, we keep listening, because we don't really know. Because I have seen some people that I'm like, how could they have gone back out? Everything looked perfect, right?
Yeah.
But it was some unknown, maybe a little part of them that they hadn't quite come to terms with yet. Maybe it's a feeling, an emotion, a memory, something that triggered.
Were they honest about what they were going through, or was their look good more important, right? And I will tell you, my look good was important to me, really important to me in the beginning, and my success. But like when I told you I had the restart, right? It is not, you know what I'm saying? It's not the title of a company. It's not, you better love me for me and not my look good, else I don't want you. And I probably won't hang out with you, because I hang out with solid motherfuckers. I can usually see through the bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I hang out with Peter.
For better or for worse.
It's actually for much better. Last night I celebrated my 59th birthday. And because I've been so busy with therapy and IOP and emotional stuff, I just wanted to keep it really simple. And me, Peter, my sponsor, and Roger, Daddy, went out to dinner. And that was just perfect for me, because the trust level there was so solid for me. And that was enough for me. I didn't care about anything else but just... And Peter played Janet Jackson the whole way.
Oh my God.
So I was hella mo. So yeah. Well, Thank you for your time.
Yeah. And I look forward to hearing your memoir or reading your memoir.
Thank you for doing this. I have to listen to the rest of the ones I haven't caught up on yet.
Yeah.
So.
Even when he's working sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for being here again and sharing your heart.
And I'm Peter for the Real Recovery Podcast
I'm Julie. Say bye, Dave.
I'm Dave. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening.
That's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks to each and every one of you for lending us your ears and hearts. Your engagement is what fuels our passion and keeps this podcast thriving.
We cherish the moments we share here and hope they resonate with you, whether you're on a daily commute, at the gym, or just taking a moment for yourself.
Make sure to head over to our website at realrecoverypodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest insights and uplifting stories from our community delivered straight to your inbox.
Click that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player too, so you can keep up with every new episode. It's your support that keeps our conversation alive and meaningful.
And if our stories have touched you, consider using the donate button on our site. Your contributions, no matter the size, are deeply appreciated. They help us continue our mission of sharing hope and healing.
Join us beyond the podcast and follow our journey on social media. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. All the links are on our site, so you can stay connected and be a part of the Real Recovery community every day.
Your likes, shares, and comments not only spread the message of recovery, but also remind us that we're all in this together.
So, until we meet again, remember that recovery is a journey, not a destination, and we'll be here to accompany you every step of the way to recovery, real recovery.
Thanks for listening.